Alright, so we are moving on to the tanks of the F-14, and there's 3 of them. So there's 2 saddle tanks, and there's a center tank, so the plumbing is going to be from saddle to center, and then from center to UAT, and so on and so forth. For this, I'm going to be using the BVM Kevlar tank hardware, and what that comes with is the tank fitting, the clunk, and the vent fitting, and there's also a rubber gasket that goes on the fitting. And so what I'm thinking I'm going to do is something like this. Those tank fittings are a perfect fit for the size of hole that Skymaster drilled in here, and so I'm going to just clean the front of here and epoxy that, and we're going to be using the long cure stuff, that's the 9462, to secure that in here. And then I'm thinking the vents are gonna go up here somewhere like that. Okay, so I'm gonna mention something here. So looking at the diameter of these tanks, that is the hole where the fitting's supposed to go, that diameter exactly matches this wide diameter here. And what that means is that if I were to install this, I don't like that fitting, because that wide part would be essentially the only spot that's holding the glue, and the glue around it would just be smeared. So what I decided to do is make these G10 plates. The thing I'm going for is something like this. So we're going to mount this onto that, epoxy that, and then that whole piece will get epoxied in the center of the tank here. And so I think that will provide for a very solid connection. So I'm going to do this on the shoulder tanks, and then work on the center tank after that. Alright, so we have our parts assembled. So I have the G10 discs already sanded a little bit to get some grit. I've also sanded the part of the fitting that's going to be glued on, and that's for both tanks. And then on the tanks themselves, I have gently sanded just the opening, so that it sticks better. And this is on both tanks. So what I'm going to do now is drill my vent positions on the top, and I think they're gonna go somewhere right in here, and then we'll glue everything together and I'll show you the final results. Alright, so the tanks have been glued, and I'm just gonna leave them in the clamp and have pieces of wood to provide pressure here and the back so that I don't squeeze the tank and or damage it. And so I just have light pressure on the tank so that everything sits in place. So we'll let this sit for 24 hours, and then we'll come back and see where we're at. Okay, so for the main tank, I've marked out where my adapter plate's gonna fit, so somewhere right around there. And that way I only scratch off the part of the surface where I'll have epoxy. And that's for both of those guys. And since I have room to maneuver here, I can test the fit before. So we're gonna put epoxy, this is the back side, all around the fitting there, and then that's gonna sit in there. And we're gonna put epoxy all around the top here and all around the back, and let that sit glued in place just like that. And we're gonna repeat that on the second side, and I'll show you what that result looks like when it's done. Okay, so it's next day, and the tank fittings are dry, and so now it's time to assemble the internal. So what I'm thinking is you'll have the pickup go through the black as Viton tubing, then through the brass tube, Viton tubing, and then down to the clunk. And what I did with this is I measured the tank in here, and so if I look at the tank this way, when placed in here, the brass portion should lie right around in here. And the idea is to prevent the internals the pickup line from coiling back on itself. So and that's just because this tank has a weird shape, so we're gonna do it this way. So I'll do that and I'll show you the result. The other key thing to point here is I took my time to make sure that these lengths are the same, and that's because we're gonna be using these saddle tanks or shoulder tanks, and because there's two of them, this is first, second, you want those to be as identical as possible to get the most identical fuel drainage out of the tank. So this Viton tubing that I got from Skymaster, I think has an internal diameter of about 4 millimeters, but it's just a little too loose on these. So you can see that it grabs, and it'll probably be fine if I tie wrap it, but it pulls out without too much force. So what I'm going to do instead is I got some Tygon that's a little bit small. I think it's like 1/16 or something, and we're going to put that over, and then we're going to slide the Viton tubing on top of it and then wire wrap it. Actually went ahead and cut those as flush to the fitting as possible. This is a little bit wider, but we can get it, and you can see that once this is tie wrapped, this is going to be a very, very solid connection. Perfect. So I like that a lot better. We're going to tie wrap this. We're going to repeat that process on this side. Alright, so the center tank, which is this guy over here, the internals for that are complete. And basically very similar design. You have a brass tube in the middle to prevent these from kinking while they're in there, and also because they'll be far apart in case they come together. So the way I figured out is, given the distance between these two and how far they'll be in the tank, if they were to come together, it would be right around where these brass tubes are, so they shouldn't be able to fold around each other. So the black line here is fuel grade Viton tubing from Skymaster. And why Viton as opposed to Tygon or something else? So one, the Viton stuff is flexible, but it's still pretty stiff. But the biggest advantage that you get from Viton is that it can sit in diesel and not degrade. So once these go in there, they should not need servicing for a very long time. Almost never need to be taken out, because that stuff is just really good stuff and designed for fuel. So that's why I went with Viton for these guys, because as I've said before, getting to these tanks and having to service them once the jet is put together could be really involved. So we want to avoid that, so we're just gonna go ahead and use Viton tubing in here, and essentially for all the tanks, inside the tanks, that is. Check tanks for leaks. So I have cinched the vent. I blew some air with my mouth through here and closed it, so you can see the tank is a little bit under pressure, so that's good. We're gonna dunk it in here. And I do not see any bubbles. So that's the top side. Let's just double check. That's the bottom side. Cool. And then, yep, there we go. We released all the air. So this tank is good to go. Here's tank number 2, the left tank. Let's dunk that guy. Been pressurized already. No air bubbles. See, she wants to float. Let's flip it upside down. No air bubbles. So Left tank looks good. We're gonna let all the air out. You heard that. This tank is good to go. Center tank. So I have plugged these two together, sealed this in, and blown air in here. Let's check and make sure no bubbles come out. So far so good. Let's flip this. Okay, so I didn't see any bubbles, and let's release the air. There it comes out. All my tanks, good to go. Alright, so we're back on the tanks, and what I'm thinking about is how I'm going to mount these tanks. And what I think I've come up with is that the swinging mechanism goes through these slots right here, but in the middle here it's pretty empty. So what I think I'm going to do is I made up one of these angle blocks, and what I think is going to happen is I'm going to glue that in place, sort of right in there, like that, and then I'm going to drill a hole through it. And so I think the key is going to be to drill the hole through so that it goes to the other end, and the other end is going to be mounted like that. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to use a bolt with a lock nut on the other side, and that way that is a very simple but effective mechanism. And the reason I think that works is because once the swing wing carbon fiber mechanism is in here, the tank can't move up or down. It also can't move forward or backwards because of the limits here. So the only thing we need to do really is prevent the tank from moving out. And so by adding this this right angle in there, it becomes really easy. You bolt that in, and I believe from what I've seen, it's easy to get with both of these hatches. Let's zoom out a little bit. With both of these hatches open, I can easily reach on the other end and thread a bolt through here and basically hold the lock nut on the other end. So that should be a lightweight way of securing the shoulder or wing mount. So here is the tank that goes on the right side. And as you can see, I've sanded just the spot where the epoxy is going to go. And then this is going to mount just like that. And what we'll do is we'll put epoxy in here and glue this. And then we will insert this, install it into the jet, and make sure that when the glue sets, the epoxy sets, this is going to be set in the correct spot. Then after that, we're going to go drill the hole through here, set it again in there, and then drill the hole through that center bulkhead that's in here. Let me show my mechanism for securing the tanks. So you can see that what I did was build in this angle mount, and that angle mount has a screw on one side, so that's an M4 screw, and on the other side I just epoxied a lock nut, and there's the lock nut. So let's see, let's zoom into there, and you see that lock nut epoxied there in place. And so to secure the tanks, you just screw in from one end and that grabs into the lock nut and you're done. And I found that it's fairly easy to with the flaps open like this, to just reach around, grab the other tank, just put some pressure on there, and then that M4 nut goes right through. So my tanks are bolted in place, and as you can see, we have that M4 screw going through, and it's tightened with a lock nut on the other side, and that's tight. That is not going anywhere. So I might have to shave off a little bit of the epoxy here because I see some of it spilled over into the slot where the carbon fiber for the swing ring is gonna go, but that's not a problem. Either way, this is a very simple mechanism. One screw through holds the tanks pretty much in place, and with the swing ring on top of here, those tanks are not going anywhere. To remove it, you just take that off and you're done. What's left of the tank system now is to install the center tank, and I have sort of moved the stuff away, and the idea is to get this guy to slide in here and sit in there. So this is a older version of this jet. I see the new ones come with attachment points down here, but this one didn't, so I'm gonna have to make those up. And what I'm thinking to do is, instead of having the tank just sit flat against the bottom, because the vents are at the top, what I'd like to do is angle the tank just ever slightly up like that, and what that's gonna allow is to get more fuel in when the jet is level. So I'm gonna mount some pieces of wood on the tank and in the fuselage, and I'll show you what the mounting system is. So we are in the front of the jet, and after spending a few minutes, almost an hour really, thinking and crafting, I think I figured out how I'm going to mount the center tank on the front. So in here, I mentioned these two rails. These are going to be guide rails in the back. And so what those will allow me to do is, when I slide the tank in, they'll prevent side-to-side movement. I also glued these two blocks of wood in the front here, epoxied them. And what that is going to be a support to first of all hold the tank so that the front end of the tank is a little bit higher than the back, so that the tank sort of, instead of sitting level, kind of sits like that. And as I said, that helps with filling the tank. But also what these blocks will do is allow me a spot to secure the tank. So here's what the tanks looks like right now. Let's see if I can put that in there. Okay, so I have fabricated this plywood plate on the bottom here, and you can see that right now it's just held in by CA because it's temporary. I want to make sure the fitment works. And so there's this block of wood here, and then this glues onto that, and then to the bottom of the tank in the channel in here. And so that's just for extra strength, and I'm going to epoxy all of this together. But that way, this block is not only gluing to like that thin surface down here and down here, but also gluing to the center of the tank. And so once that's in place, you can see that as it sits right now, there's basically no side-to-side movement. Like, it basically jerks the whole plane because the back is secured between those two rails. And so when I get the screws, probably two on each side here, to secure that down, the tank is not going anywhere. So those are the plans. That's sort of where I'm at with this process. So I'm going to go finish that off and show the finished product. All right, so I think the mounting of the front tank is pretty much complete. And as you can see, that plate method worked out pretty well. So we have this bottom plate that's epoxy to the tank. And then underneath here, there were those two blocks, one on either side of sort of this curvature under here. And that's what these screws screw into. And these screws are fairly long. Here's a screw. So here's a screw, and the length of the thread is roughly 16 millimeters, 16 and a half millimeters. So there's plenty of thread that is biting in between these two pieces of wood. That is the plate and the block that they screw into. And this tank is bolted on. It's not going anywhere. It's got protection in the back. It can't lift up because of this. I might put some foam under here on the top side just to protect it and make sure that it's wedged in there good. So I might glue some foam on the top side of the tank and the inside. But this is pretty solid. It's not going anywhere, and I'm happy with that result. So I pulled out the tank, and you can see the holes. So there's one hole, second hole, third hole, fourth hole, and they are drilled diagonally that way. So what I'm gonna do is add some thin CA in there because I've already created the threads, and that thin CA is gonna help form up the wood so that it's nice and strong, and so those screws don't come off. So with the CA added like that, those holes are strong, and the next time I thread them in, we'll be able to hold better. Okay, so the tanks are about to go into the jet, and what I want to show here is just the standard stuff. So first and foremost, you can see all the connections or piping connections are wire wrapped. So that's wire wrapped there, wire up here at the vent, and then we're using a Festo Y, and that's also been wire upped accordingly. And so what I think I'm gonna do is we'll install this side first, and then there's enough length here so that I can install and tie wrap or wire wrap this vent before this is pushed in. And then what happens is the middle of the plane is going to be right around here, and it's just going to sit at the top. So those will all go in. These wires are cut to these lines are cut to exactly the same length, so that length is equivalent to that length, and the same goes for the pickup plumbing, so that is equivalent to this guy. This connection has been wire wrapped, and I think these tanks are now ready to be secured, and then I'm gonna install the swing wing mechanism back in place. So I think I need to get that done, then install the gear in place, and once that's installed, put the swing wing back and figure out how I'm going to route my airline wires that are coming from the back, because I haven't decided if I want the setup tray to be sort of in this area here or further forward in the aircraft. So we'll get that done first, and then we'll come back and reorganize that stuff. So it's time to put the swing wing back, because I think looking at how everything is going to mount in there, it looks pretty straightforward. I'm going to have to figure out if that T still works. I may need to change it, I don't know. But at this point, I think the swinging is going to go back in so that I can mount the wings and figure out where the placement of stuff's going to go. One of the things that needed to happen was all of these screws in here that hold this mechanism together did not have any thread locker. So I'm going to go through each one of them one by one, pull the screws apart, put thread locker, and reassemble this, and then stick it back in the jet. I'm not going to show that on camera, but you can see I've already started. So that one already has some thread locker, and I need to do all the rest of them. So the swing wing mechanism is back in, and I have gone through and Loctited all of these bolts. You can see some Loctite in there. So there are screws that hold the mechanism, the swinging mechanism from below. So you can see, let's see, there's one screw right there, and there's another screw right there. Those have also been Loctited. Same on the other side of the gear. There's also a couple of screws here. So there's one that holds the mechanism for the swing wing, so the actual actuator. So there's plastic in there, so when I Loctited this, the spaces of plastic, I put Loctite on the top in here and just drove the screw up, down, up and down until I got it coated in a little bit of Loctite. So that's done, and this is on both sides of the wing. There is this screw that secures the other end of the actuator, and so this goes into this piece of aluminum here, which is threaded. And what I've found is, because this piece actually needs to move as the swing wing opens and closes, they provide you with a lock nut on the bottom. So that lock nut is tight, but it's tight enough such that this actuator is not fully set in place. There's just a little bit of movement. So With the lock nut on the bottom, that's not going to move, but I found it pretty important to mention that this actuator needs to be able to move so it can align itself. The other thing I did is lock tight all of the connections in here and on both sides of the gear, so of the swinging mechanism. So this is back in place just as we expect, and this is good because now I can install the wing and see how much room I have to put my fuel system, ECU system stuff all around, so that the operation of the jet happens on this side as well as the other side. So I think I have all my cables and plumbing from the back of the jet coming to the front, and you can see it's just loosely zip tied on both sides now. And so what I'm trying to do now is make sure that this Y fitting will work with the center tank. I have a feeling that I might have to use a T as opposed to a Y. But we'll see. So we're going to try that and make sure that it locks, that I can secure the tank with the locking mechanism, which is essentially these wooden blocks right here. You can see that there's spots where screws go in to secure the tank. So the tank is in. It's an extremely tight fit. So what I had to do is, here's a vent line that's going on the roof of the tank. What I had to do is tape that with some fiberglass tape right in here so that it's taped to the top of the roof, and then just push the tank back. And because there's room right at the back end of the tank between the tank and the former, that line, the vent line, was able to fit there. So that's just gonna come all the way to the front, and it's gonna empty, the owner of this jet wants it on the front nose section, so it's gonna empty somewhere in here. But here are the other pickups, so those go to this and here respectively. And now we can start working on the front section of the jet. Before we join the nose, we are gonna make sure everything is done right. So we have a wire wrap on both of our pickups from the center tank and on our vents up top. And so now we're just gonna bring all of this stuff into the front section. The nose attaches with 6 screws, so there's 4 that go 2 up here, 2 on the bottom, and then there's 2 on either side. So we're gonna attach those and move on from there.